You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we're bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. Today, we're going to bring you a show where we're going to be exploring the issue of freedom of association and cancellation, I guess, because we talked last week about quite a bit about Charlie Kirk and the assassination that happened with him. Well, there's been a lot of fallout since that show, and so we wanted to talk about some of what's going on with that. But before we get into any of that, let me introduce you to our panel. It's a small panel today. It's just me and Leon again today, and so it is Leon Word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California, and my name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So one of the things we always like to do is we like to kick off with a quote. But before we do that, I wanted to make an announcement so we don't forget about Constitution Day that's coming up. That is going to be happening close to Folsom. It's actually at 8990 Crudoff Way, near the VFW Hall out there, I guess, and that's near Fair Oaks and Hazel. So that's where to go check that out on Sunday, September 21st from noon to 4. So a lot of people who are really dedicated to promoting our constitutional rights out there and, getting educated themselves. And it's a great event for you to go check that out and maybe meet some like-minded people who are really helping to organize so that we can defend our liberties. So let's jump back into the show. And I wanted to get into our quote of the day. And I thought this one was a really good quote from Walter Williams. So he's, kind of one of my favorite economist guys who has helped to enlighten me a little bit, through a lot of his YouTube videos and such about how the world works. For better or worse. And he had some thoughts on freedom of association that sound very similar to a lot of good thoughts I've heard from others on freedom of speech as well. But he says the true test of one commitment to freedom of association doesn't come when he allows people to associate in ways he approves. The true test of that commitment comes when he allows people to be free to voluntarily associate in ways he deems despicable. Forced association is not freedom of association. So, and this is, one of those things, a lot of people, they think about the Bill of Rights and they think free speech, and then they immediately jump to Second Amendment and issues of due process and other things like that. But this is one of those things that a lot of people don't realize. That's one of our most important liberties, is our idea of being free to not just say what we want to say out in public, but be able to be around people that we prefer to be around. So, and this is actually one of the great ways that we can address people who are, essentially really terrible people. Maybe they say really awful things, and you have the freedom that you don't have to hang around that person, right? Exactly. And that's one of the best ways to push back at it, to be able to disassociate yourself from those people. And we're going to talk a lot about this going throughout the show, but that's kind of what I'm taking away from this quote. And Leon, what do you think about this quote from Mr. Williams?
Well, he talk about freedom of association, and when you're talking about despicable things or despicable people or despicable groups, and and this is a very important point. For instance, take the Ku Klux Klan, right, which by all measure is a despicable organization, and I would never think that any decent-minded person would want to be a part of that, right? But do they have a right to associate like-minded people? Do they have a right to associate? As much as I despise them, I would defend their right to do so, to associate and do everything that they can do within the boundaries of the law that any other organization can do. I will defend their right to do that. We have a very famous case. This more involved freedom of speech rather than association, but it did involve association. when I think it was the 60s or the 70s, when the Ku Klux Klan or the Nazi, or I think or probably some Nazi organization was trying to march through Skokie, Illinois, which was a predominantly Jewish city, and the city tried to ban them from doing so. And the amazing thing about that case is that the ACLU, when they used to be a reasonable organization, not an organization that really defended our rights, not this rabid left wing piece of crap it is now. They defended the right of the Nazis to march to Skokie, Illinois. The case ended up on the Supreme Court, and the city lost. Okay, the city lost. And one of the things the stuff that is not normally reported, one of the people on the who was defending the Ku Klux Klan, right? They were not defending the Nazis or whoever they were not defending the content of the organization. They were defending their rights. And one of the people who was doing this was Jewish, believe it or not. I mean, it's just hard to fathom that, right? But this is the point, though. This is where the character of a nation comes into being, is that we have to be able, because our right of association, our right of free speech, all of these things, those things are not there when we're laughing and smiling, when things are nice and wonderful. Those things are there to defend speech, even when it's repugnant, even when we can't stand it, or even when people are associating with organizations which we think are despicable. As long as they're not engaging in criminal activity, they have that right to associate and do all the things that all other organizations who we may love and hold dear in our hearts, they have the right to do all of those things, as long as they're doing nothing illegal.
Yeah. Well, and just like, we would think with ideas and speech, if somebody isn't being allowed to say something, how do you know the person making the rules actually has the right answer? How do you know that whatever they're saying is the correct speech, right? This is the problem. You go back to, the famous case that everybody almost loves to invoke is the case of Galileo. And, he was, one of the most famous people in the history of science. And, back in the day, it wasn't completely clear to everybody that, the evidence of whether or not everything revolved around the earth, or the earth revolved around other things. And this is one of the things Galileo was testing with his inventions, like the telescope and some of the other physical observations he was making about the universe. And at the time, the Catholic Church controlled most of the right think, I guess you'd call it, at that point. And they said that, no, we know that everything revolves around us.
Yeah.
And Galileo challenged that, and he was actually put into what do they call that? Kind of like he was confined to his home. He was put into almost like a solitary confinement for the rest of his life for challenging that.
Yeah.
But this is the point, right? I mean, who knows? Just because the majority of people think one thing, that doesn't mean they're right.
Yeah.
So we have to be free to say things. What's the same thing with association, right? Who's to say one group of people is necessarily right? The only way we can really test this is out in the marketplace, and let these ideas flow, and hopefully we'll kind of touch on some of this as we go throughout the program today. So just to refresh everybody, I wanted to bring back the story of the issue with Charlie Kirk. So we talked about that last week, and we're not going to dive way into that story again, but he was speaking on the University of Utah.
Utah Valley University.
Yeah, and he was shot while he was speaking there. He was assassinated by a guy with a gun who didn't like what he was saying, and so, anyways, that is what everybody has been grappling with. It's kind of become a much bigger story than I think anybody could have realized, but this has also led to a lot of people. We are so divided as a country that there are so many people who are expressing their profound love for Charlie Kirk, and on the same token, there's a whole bunch of people who are just spewing hate for Charlie Kirk after this happened. And I'm going to bring up a video now so that we can kind of get a little bit of a sense of what that's all about. Some of the just the ideas online that people have been, and also in person, some of the ways people have been attacking vigils. So let me play this video.
Justin, a man has been arrested after vandalizing the Charlie Kirk Memorial outside of TP USA headquarters in Arizona. The suspect identified as a 19-year-old Ryder Corral there. So we're also getting this video that I want to show you. This was the scene that was captured by Fox News a little bit earlier on. You can see people addressing this individual, potentially vandalizing what was going on there with this memorial, people stepping in, just average citizens, not necessarily law enforcement, but ultimately law enforcement did get involved as this suspect identified as a 19-year-old, as a man is arrested. So you can see police, Phoenix police, there on hand, putting this individual in handcuffs or zip tie.
So there's a lot of defacing of memorials to Charlie Kirk going on out there, and I think almost everybody can understand that defacing property out there should be illegal, but it starts to get a little bit more in a gray area when you start getting online and people are saying just all kinds of horrible things there. So let's see a little bit of that.
Since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the internet has shown its dark side.
I think the only thing that went wrong that day was that Trump wasn't standing behind him getting a secondhand bullet.
Libs of TikTok has become a steady stream of calling out those who are celebrating the death of the conservative activists, from a DA in Montana to college professors, Democratic candidates, and lots of teachers.
The guy who made a living spewing evil, hate-filled rhetoric died from getting shot right in the voice box. I might be 1% less atheist today.
Also in Virginia, a realtor posted, "The world is a better place with less Trump supporters, period."
So this is where we get into the question of freedom of association, because these people are saying a lot of terrible things and people are seeing what they're saying online. I mean, these people are posting stuff of themselves saying horrible, awful things, and employers are seeing it and they're saying, I don't want that person working for me. I'm going to fire them. Let's see a little bit about this news report on that.
Some of those celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk online are finding the First Amendment protections have limits.
People don't understand that freedom of speech protects you from being arrested and put in jail for what you say, but it doesn't protect you from losing your job if you're irresponsible.
Phoenix Sports firing a Phoenix Suns beat writer for calling Kirk an evil man spewing hateful rhetoric. The Carolina Panthers firing a communications coordinator for an Instagram post with a Wu-Tang Clan song, Protect Your Neck. Kirk died from a shot to the neck. DC Comics canceled a new book series after the author wrote a post saying, "Hope the bullet's okay," after touching Charlie.
And so most of those were private employees, but there are some public employees as well.
Ole Miss and Middle Tennessee State University firing employees for sharing insensitive comments about Kirk. A high school teacher in Maryland under fire for writing, "Wrong guy, but we'll take what we can get, I guess."
Would you want a teacher who said this to be teaching your children?
No, I would not.
Ilhan Omar facing backlash for slamming those honoring Kirk's dedication to civil dialogue.
A complete rewriting of history.
Yeah, there is nothing more effed up.
MSNBC firing an analyst for these comments in the moments after the shooting.
We don't know if this was a supporter shooting their gun off.
And by the way, that image of Matthew Dowd, we played that last week because he was literally, you talk about misinformation. He's saying, gosh, we really don't know who could have done this. It might have just been one of his reporters shooting a gun. This is a college campus.
Yeah. I mean,
it's aren't a bunch of hillbillies sitting around shooting their guns off.
And why you had to speculate that one of Charlie Kirk's supporters shot him. But maybe, I guess he was implying by accident. I guess I don't know. But why that? Because the only speculation he could come up with, it's just so the craziness of these people.
Yeah.
But
sorry. Go ahead, Leon.
No, go ahead. No, finish what you thought.
Well, I just wanted to bring up this article, and so what we were seeing there in the video is that this is resulting in people getting fired. A lot of people getting fired from their jobs and put on lists, and I guess it brings up a lot of confusion about what people believe their free speech rights are and what freedom of association is. And a lot of people think that they can just say whatever they want with complete impunity. And what that guy was saying, that one law professor in that video that we showed, he was saying, hey, look, this protects you from the government coming to get you and put you in jail. It doesn't protect you from people not wanting to be around you after you die.
That is the main point. That is the main point, and a lot of people do not understand this. And I'm talking about adults do not understand this. That when you say we have a First Amendment right, we have this right of free speech, we could say whatever the hell we want in America. Well, not quite. Because that thing only protects you, just like the professor said, that only protects you against the government. It does not protect you against a private employer who has a reputation to protect. So if I work for XYZ company, okay, some private company, and I'm out there as an employee of that company writing this sort of things, people come to my store or whatever it is I have, whatever business I have, people come there, people knowing that you work there, how are they going to feel about doing business with me? Doing business with the organization. That company, whoever it is, whether we're talking about Walmart, whether we're talking about Coca-Cola or whoever it is, they have a reputation to protect. And if you have become an impediment in the protection of that reputation, you are dispensable. Goodbye. Sorry. But, we have to make a distinction here, and this is where it gets a little bit fuzzy. Yes, with private employers, if they don't want to have you around them for whatever reason, they could say goodbye to you because your free speech rights don't protect you against adverse consequences with an employer, a private employer. Now, public employers might be a little bit different in the sense that this is the government taking action against you, even though you may be an employee, but you're an employee of the government. And if the government is censoring your speech, well, your free speech rights may have a claim of a violation of a free speech right may have some validity there. So like a private university want to get rid of a professor, that should not be too difficult. You might try to sue and blah, 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 whatever. But that might not go anywhere. But on a public university, that might be a problem because if it's a public university, indirectly it's the government controlling the university, and if they try to fire you, well, that may be government censorship. For if you did try to say something, so that's where it gets a little bit fuzzy. But where private employers are concerned, people got to get this through their heads. You have no free speech protection if you're working for a private employer. And people have this thing in their head, they walk around, oh, this is my right, my right, my right, my right. No. But then I want to go back to a little something that you were talking about earlier, Jason, about who draw the lines. This is why where the problems has begin. So some people, mostly on the left, they think this speech is not good, that speech is not good, you should not be saying this, and you should not be saying that. Of course, we saw the horrible consequences of Charlie Kirk's assassination. Because some people felt Charlie Kirk had no right to be saying some of the things he's saying, okay? The question will always come back at the end of the day, who draw the lines? Who is going to say what is the boundary of speech? Do we want the government to be saying that? What are the boundaries? Do we want some left-wing organization in the back of nowhere to say what you and I can or cannot discuss tonight on the show? Is that what we want? No, we don't want that. So the only way, the only fair way, the only reasonable and just way that we can have to protect our rights of free speech is let that speech go into the marketplace of ideas. What good speech will survive, bad speech will die. And that's how it should be. But these left-wing fools think they have their answer. If you don't bow down to us, we can resort to violence. So yeah, better shut the F up.
Yeah, and this is the sad thing, right? In a civil society, and it feels like we used to have a civil society at one point.
Yes.
But a civil society, I mean, the only way you can address ideas that you dislike peacefully is to either use better ideas in response or walk away. If they are a horrible person and they are not somebody who's amenable to a conversation, you don't have to be around them. I mean, that's the wonderful thing. If they try to force you to, then they're violating, your body. They're violating, they are committing a physical assault on you if they try and hold you in place to listen to their terrible ideas, right? But I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothing keeping you from being able to walk away, right? And this is why freedom of association is so important, because, suppose, I was part of a particular religious group or another particular club, and somebody didn't like those ideas. Well, you should be able to have a place where you can separate yourself from people who don't like those ideas and just, have conversations with people who do like that. You don't have to have somebody screaming from the, inside of your church, protesting everything in the sermon, right? I mean, how absurd would that be, right? I mean, but that's freedom of association, right? Everybody in that church has decided that they want to come there to share ideas with each other, and because they all kind of believe something somewhat similar, and so that's why they want to be there. Yes, and they shouldn't have to tolerate somebody else jumping in and shouting at them the whole time. Of course. Right?
So like-minded people will get together and speak and sing and dance and do whatever they want to do. Maybe have a discussion like we are having right now. Like-minded people will do this. But if we are on YouTube and somebody don't like what we're saying, their answer is not, well, we have to shut up them two guys, right? That's not the answer. Get off of YouTube. Go look at somebody else. There are tons of people who might be willing to talk the nonsense that you believe in. I don't believe what we do talking here is nonsense. We don't talk good stuff here anyway. But anyway, that's a different discussion. But the point is though, you can always disassociate yourself. Okay? You could, if you're on TV, take for instance like Charlie Kirk, God rest his soul. He was all over TV, all over YouTube. Well, if you don't want to hear him, don't take off the TV or go look at another channel. If you don't want to see him on the campuses, don't go to the campus where he's speaking. Why do you have to go there? For what? If you don't care for him. What the point is you can always disassociate yourself, whereas from being a part of a crowd that he's addressing, or turning off the YouTube or looking for other channels, looking for other avenues. You always have that right to do that. Well, and it's just like you say, it's only when we get to, I'm going to force you, I'm going to take you in my house and make you sit down and you have to listen to me. Well, that's a different problem. That's kidnapping. So you're going to be in problem. You got problems anyway, right? But there's no such thing in the... Go ahead.
Well, it was just funny because you brought up the, a different channel. I mean, I remember growing up, I always remember hearing, hey, if you don't like what we're doing, turn the channel on the television, Of course, now you have the internet, right? You have a million choices. So why people feel like they're so constrained that they just get so upset with people that they have to cancel them out is just absolutely nuts. But... But I did want to get a little bit more into where some of the freedom of association comes from. But before we do that, I also want to bring up the sense that when we're talking about people right now who are getting canceled, or, people having their freedom of association where people are saying, I don't want to be around you. I mean, that's kind of a form of cancellation, right? But it has happened as well. It doesn't just come from one direction. So I did want to bring up the other side of this, just so people aren't, understand that this is a double-edged sword. And, occasionally this is happening to conservatives for what they think. And so I'm going to play this one. Here was a guy who was a sportscaster here in Sacramento for the Sacramento Kings, the basketball team. I used to listen to this guy all the time, but let me show you the video so you can kind of see what the issue was, why he got fired.
Federal judge has ended the wrongful termination lawsuit brought by former Kings announcer Grant Napier. KCRA 3's Gulston Dart joins us now with today's ruling.
Yeah, Curtis. Well, Grant Napier was fired over what became a controversial social media exchange with former Kings player DeMarcus Cousins back in 2020. That exchange started with Cousins asking Napier, "What's your take on Black Lives Matter?" Napier responded in part, "All lives matter, every single one." Now, some believed at the time that his post minimized the Black Lives Matter movement, since that comment came a week week after the killing of George Floyd.
So I found this story particularly horrible when this happened, and this is obviously a cancellation by the left. I used to listen to the Kings a lot growing up here in Sacramento, and of course Grant Napier was one of those voices, the Kings, that you always heard. And to hear him get fired on an organization simply for saying all lives matter instead of Black Lives Matter, I just can't imagine anything more offensive than that. But let's hear a little bit more.
And Bonneville International fired Napier from his radio show on KHTK 1140 shortly thereafter. And then Napier sued, claiming the company violated his religious freedom rights and California labor laws that protect employees' political activity. A federal judge previously dismissed Napier's religious freedom claim and then recently ruled that applying state labor protections to this case would be unconstitutional. Napier's attorney believes that the ruling goes too far and says that the case is not over.
So again, Grant Napier fired simply for saying all lives matter, with no redress in the court. Certainly not making fun of the death of anybody or anything that offensive. Anyways, there was another story that was more recent in one of these cancellations from the left, and there's this debate series called Jubilee, where a guy named Mehdi Hassan from the left was debating with a bunch of people, I guess from the right is the best way to characterize him, and one of them self-described as himself, or he owned the label fascist, and he got fired for that. So let's see that.
I think you could say I'm a fascist.
Yeah, I am.
I read that man has now lost his job. He's been sacked. I wonder what you make of that.
Well, I'm not sure what to believe about that, because some people online have pointed out that Connor, I think his name was, the self-proclaimed fascist who came to debate me on the Jubilee YouTube show. He claimed to have lost his job. He did that thing that lots of right-wing people do where they're like, oh, look at me, I'm the victim. He did a fundraiser, made lots of money from his far-right friends.
So, yeah, I mean, here we see it happens on all sides. But, in the end, I mean, if you're an employer, why should you have to, if you see somebody saying horrible things that you don't agree with, why should you have to associate with that person? I feel like for Grant Napier, he really got a raw deal there, because I mean, to me, I agree with him. All lives matter. I mean, Black lives are part of all lives. Right?
Yeah. I don't think a Black life is worth more or less than a white life. So I don't know what the hell it is we're dealing with here. Now, in the Grant Napier case, now these are private organizations, and I have to agree, if I'm going to be consistent with their right to disassociate themselves with whoever they choose to do so. Okay, in this case, it was Grant Napier. But I agree with you. I think he got a raw deal. But what was especially galling about this?
Well, hold on, Leon, before you tell us what was especially galling, if you're listening on public access, you're going to have to tune in online at knuckleheadsofliberty.com to find out what Leon thinks was especially galling. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to dive more into the issues of government, issues on firing people for their ideas as well, and a little bit about where freedom of association comes from. But anyways, back to the show, Leon.
Yeah. So, like I said, I still give the company the right to disassociate themselves from Grant Napier. However, in that case, what is especially galling about that case is that Black Lives Matter, the organization, is such a fraud. And even back then, we knew they were nothing but a fraud, about a money-grabbing race hustlers. That's what they were. The only thing that happened from the Black Lives Matter movement was that a bunch of their leaders have enriched themselves. They got $100 million from corporations throughout America in 2020 when they were burning down our cities. And nothing ever came of that money except enriching the leaders of the organization. But the point is, though, Grant Napier, in all of that melee that was going on, got fired because he said all lives matter, which is an absolute true statement. Okay, because no life should matter more or less than any other life. If there are inequities in society, let's address them. If there is, let's address them. If people's rights are not being defended as they should be, whatever, let's address that. But don't try to tell me all lives matter is some racist statement rather than we must emphasize Black Lives Matter. Why? Seriously, why? I'm a Black man. I don't think my life is worth more than anybody else. But I don't think it's worth less than anybody else either. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. So, but the point is, though, this thing about freedom association, like I said earlier, I am fine with private employers making these kind of choices as much as despise the outcome of the case with Grant Napier. I am very fine with them making those choices because I don't want the government doing it. Okay? So we have to let those things happen. Unfortunately, people are going to suffer as a result of it in some cases that are truly, truly unjust. Yeah. But there's no other way to get around it because we can't let the government be involved in these sort of things. We can't.
Well, let's try and find out before we go too much farther into this where some of the limitations come from, I guess. So, as far as our Bill of Rights and our constitutional protections here, we know where our freedom of speech comes from. That is the first one in the Bill of Rights. That is the First Amendment to the Constitution. And it says, right there that you have, the freedom of speech, right? And it says you have the freedom of assembly as well. And
peaceably assemble. Yes.
And it also mentions religion as well in there, that you have the right to assemble for those reasons. And I think the issue is that even though it doesn't explicitly say association, there's no way you can logically read the First Amendment without the inference of a freedom of association, because how can you choose to assemble or not assemble if you don't have freedom of association, right? So it's really embedded within the First Amendment. And I believe I heard, another justice refer once to the idea that there's also a tie into the due process of the 14th Amendment as well. But, that First Amendment, if you just logically play it out, there's no way for you to, if you don't have the freedom to be around people that you want to be, to share ideas with, then how can you even share the ideas with them, right? I mean, how can you hear from them? How can you talk to them? How can you share your ideas or have their ideas shared with you if you don't even have the ability to associate with them? And so that's really where it's coming from. But there are limits as well, which is crazy. I don't like a lot of these limits that they're trying to say. But Leon, it sounded like you were about to jump in. So before we get to whatever
No, you're talking about people associating and people being free to associate with whoever they wish to. But I think this is one of Charlie Kirk's big ideas, is that we have to be able to freely associate, and we have to be able to talk to even people we disagree with without being disagreeable. I don't think he ever said it that way. But we have to be able to talk. And when we don't talk is when bad stuff happens. And I think this was mostly Charlie's words. So this freedom of association is so vitally important to have a civil society. We must be able to freely associate, and we must be able to peaceably assemble. If we cannot do those things, we're not going to have a civil society, and we're not going to have any kind of society at all.
Mm-hmm. And just for anybody who's not clear on the First Amendment, it's funny. I mean, for those of us who love liberty, most of us are kind of familiar with the Bill of Rights. Maybe we don't remember it all the time, but we at least know it's there and where to go to reread it. But there's so many people, it's unbelievable because of our bad state of education that they haven't really even read this stuff once. And so it's fairly short. This is what the First Amendment says. So I'm just going to read it. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So there you have it. And that's where, so much of our foundational liberty is anchored by, I guess, in this country.
But it says so right there, the freedom of association. It is right there in the First Amendment. That is where it comes from. This is one of our liberties that we must always be able to exercise. But you see, the left, and mostly the left in this country, they want to be able to draw the lines. They want to draw the lines. They want to tell us we should not go to our campus and listen to Charlie Kirk. Okay? They want to tell us that, well, MAGA, Make America Great people, Trump supporters, they are Hitler, they are Nazis, they are this and that. And after you sit around for so long and talk so much about Trump being Hitler, Orange man bad, his supporters are deplorables, the basket of deplorables, and all these sort. After you're sat around for this long and dehumanize all of these people, how far does it take for some nutball to come along and he say, well, you know, these people are less than human. It's time to eliminate them. You know, during the 2024 election campaign, twice they tried to eliminate Donald Trump. And an assassin bullet got this close to his head. It got his ear. Another slight turn, Trump would have been gone today. Unfortunately, they got Charlie Kirk last week Wednesday. But the point is, though, these people think they can draw the lines for civil society. I don't know how they could think in their deluded mind that a civil society could come at the end of bullets. I do not know how that comes about. How you think that silencing the voice of Charlie Kirk is going to make our society better, even if you have what you think is a justifiable case to be upset with Charlie. How does it make it better? Yeah. I just can't conceive of what rationale you can come up with that will make sense to anybody with a half a brain. And this is the madness that's going on, that these people think they could draw lines on our speech. It just go back to this Black Lives Matter nonsense we were just speaking about. Just because a man says all lives matter, somehow or the other, he has crossed some line, some invisible line that you constructed somewhere in your crazy mind, and you think this man's life should be ruined for it. This is the craziness of these leftist people who think they know where those lines should be. It's insane.
And here's the thing, though. I mean, as sad as it is that somebody like Grant Napier lost his job for that, imagine how much worse it would be if those same people had the ability to control government and to be able to apply force on somebody because they didn't agree with them, right? So, I mean, even though Grant Napier lost his job, he's still free to try to find a job somewhere else and be able to associate with other people who agree with him. But if people who control the government, I mean, those regimes, you disappear into a gulag if you don't have the same ideas as the people in control of power. And somehow the people of the left never seem to understand that. And sometimes the people of the right too, but it always seems like the people of the left, they have this faith that government is always going to do what they want it to do. That's you know, a lot of times those people are rudely you know, awakened when somebody comes to power in one of those totalitarian states, and then they don't realize that there was a famous line in the movie A Man for All Seasons where you know, he's the main character is talking with his son-in-law, and the son-in-law is saying, you know, he poses a question. He says, well, what would you do if you had the ability to get to the devil? If you could, you know, would you knock down all the laws in order to get to him? He said, of course I would. I'd knock down every law. And he says, so what would you do at the point that the devil turns around on you and you have no laws to fall back on? You know, all that, you know. And I mean, that's the point, right? I mean, as we've erected all these things as part of a civil society to be able to protect our freedom of speech. And I think so many people, they don't realize that until they're gone. And so, yeah.
You know, it gets back to an important point that we were trying to highlight in one of our past episodes. I think it's maybe the third to last or whatever it was, about you when you think you're going to go after a monster, you have to be careful you don't become a monster in the pursuit of the monster. Yeah. And I think that somebody has a quote about that we were talking about.
I thought that was Nietzsche. I thought.
Yes, I think you're right about that. Yes.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing here about the devil. Yeah, right. You break down every law to get that devil. Boy, we gotta get him. We gotta get him. We break every law to do so, and then when the devil turns on you, who will help you if you have broken all the laws to get there? You know.
Yep. So. Yeah. Well, anyways, I did want to talk about just a few other examples as well of cancellations that have been notable in this freedom of association. So, you know, we really realize just because we are free to exercises freedom of association doesn't mean we shouldn't be careful in doing it. And so here was a article that the Babylon Bee put together on a whole bunch of different people who were canceled. And here was a story of it said a California man was fired over alleged white power signs when he was cracking his knuckles. I don't know, somebody saw like an OK sign or something like that.
Oh,
and he said,
Lord.
oh my God, it's the white power movement. And so a guy loses his job because of that, right? And that's freedom of association, right?
Yes.
Irrational idea. Here's an officer who gave $25 to Kyle Rittenhouse's defense is fired. So that was a police officer who just donated $25. If you remember, Kyle Rittenhouse was the boy who was young man who was trying to defend his community with a bunch of other people when all of these mobs during the summer of love that the Democrats had unleashed on us in 2020.
Yes.
And, we were seeing different cities get burned to the ground, and they went out there and they were trying to maintain order because the police weren't, by just standing in front of businesses armed. And, he wound up being assaulted, and in self-defense, he shot somebody and killed them. And this was, in fact, it turned out the guy was a child molester too that he shot.
Yes.
But, you can't make this stuff up. But but the crazy thing was the left wanted him prosecuted for being out there defending businesses that were from being torched. And here's a police officer giving $25 to his defense fund and, fired for it, right? So, we see these cancellations constantly. And, whether or not the cancellations make sense, ultimately will be tested out in the marketplace, right? I mean, there's not really any other way to do it. And there will be some people who are unfairly, hit by this. But the alternative is, one size fits all government rule. And I don't think any of us are going to be ultimately comfortable with that.
But there's a big hypocrisy in the firing of that police officer. He gave $25 to Rittenhouse defense, which I mean, I didn't donate any money to him, to Rittenhouse, but I would have if I had the opportunity to do so. But around that same time that police officer gave $25 to the Rittenhouse defense, who was given money that allowed criminals during all this summer of love to be put back on the streets? Who was given money to a fund in Minnesota and some other place, I think? It was our dear beloved Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris at the time. Okay? That idiot. And nobody ever did anything to her. Nobody ever said anything about her. Well, I guess we did eventually speak our piece, which was in the election, which fine. This probably was the most just outcome. I don't know if that weighed into anybody's mind at the time they were voting in the elections. But the point is, though, that hypocrisy is there. We want to cancel out a police officer for contributing to Kyle Rittenhouse because Kyle Rittenhouse is, well, he's a white dude, he's a white supremacist, he's a racist, blah, blah, blah. Even though most of the people he shot, I think, were white, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, but he's a racist and all that sort of thing. All this kind of nonsense. But here's Kamala, Well, Kamala now is a person of color. It's okay. So she could donate to a fund that allow criminals to go back on the street. She could do that. That's okay. She's a person of color. So she have some special protection against criticism on this matter. This is the craziness of these things.
Well, that was kind of funny, too, that you mentioned the color of the people that Kyle Rittenhouse shot, because that was initially one of the lies that was given against Kyle Rittenhouse. Because remember, all these protests came about because of BLM and George Floyd, fallout from George Floyd. And so initially they were reporting that, people were assuming that these were black people that Kyle Rittenhouse shot, and they weren't. One of them was some white child molester, and another who apparently had been stalking him throughout the event. And another actually pulled out a weapon as well, I think, So,
yes, he did. He did, yes.
So this is, absolutely nuts. But, this is another example I wanted to give here, too. But, after October 7th, you had a lot of pro-Palestine protests going on college campuses, because October 7th of I can't remember which year it was that
2023.
2023, and that was essentially that horrible where a bunch of the people from Palestine, I guess some of the
It was from the Gaza,
Hamas,
Hamas control in Gaza.
Yeah. So it was some of the Hamas terrorists from Palestine. They came through a fence and they slaughtered almost 1,000 or around 1,000 Israeli citizens and other people who'd been there too for things like a music concert and such. And so there was that really brought that issue back to the fore of what should happen with Palestine, between Palestine and Israel. And so there were a lot of pro-Palestine protests going on the campuses. And Bill Ackman decided that he didn't like a lot of what the protesters were saying about Israel. So he wanted a list compiled of these people to be able to make sure that they'd have a hard time finding work in the future, because these were all college students, right? And so, I mean, this is, kind of the double-edged sword that can happen here, right? I mean, whether you agree with what he was doing or not, that's freedom of association. And people, I don't know. I mean, maybe this is the issue, like a lot of Second Amendment people say, an armed society is a more polite society. Maybe if everybody realizes that there's consequences to potential consequences from others, what they say, not the government, but from other people, maybe we'll all treat each other a little more civilly. I don't know. But that's certainly something to consider. And it was definitely of the same thing we're talking about here.
I mean, I could understand Bill Ackman's sentiments about the whole thing on the campuses, but you still have to wonder about when people gathering lists on people and using it and going to use it in the future to prevent them from getting jobs and all that kind of stuff. I mean, some of these campus protests, so-called protests, was just downright horrible, quite frankly. But how far do we go? I mean, if they were doing anything illegal, let's prosecute them. I'm all for that. If there was anything illegal done, I'm all for that. But, where do you draw those lines? Sometimes that's hard to say. It's really hard to say. Even though I understand Ackman's sentiment on this matter.
Well, and let's understand here too. I mean, there is a market mechanism to control somebody like Ackman as well, right? Because if Ackman decides that there's all these people that he won't hire for some reason, and let's suppose that reason is irrational. Let's say it's because I saw you all wearing green hats and I've got you on my list. I'm going to make sure I never hire you. Well, there may be a lot of good employees in that green hat wearing bunch, right? And if you just put them on a list for some irrational reason, then you may actually be denying your company. It may be costing you in the marketplace to make an irrational, for that irrational bigotry potentially against green hat wearing people. So yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we'll have to say, Jason, that as long as it's not the government making those irrational choices, I guess we'll have to accept Ackman's irrational conduct, because he will suffer, because he's going to lose potentially some good talent, and some of his other friends, I guess, who probably would have agreed with him in his actions, will also lose some potentially good talent. So then the marketplace will rule. Let the marketplace rule on these things, and I'm fine with that. I mean, sometimes it may be costly, but I would prefer that the marketplace makes a decision than the government do. So,
well, but ultimately, too, that's how we really test things: is whether it's an irrational or rational or irrational bias, is how it plays out in the marketplace, right? Because suppose that it was very irrational. Well, then that means his competitors, somebody else who wants to make money, is going to see that he's got an irrational bias, and they're going to go hire the people that he didn't hire. On the other hand, suppose that it's a very rational bias. Suppose that, these are a bunch of people that are cheering for people getting killed. I don't think that's going to help my company to have a bunch of people who are bloodthirsty lunatics who want people dead for their ideas, right? If that was if I was able to do that, it'd be tested in the marketplace. But that's the only way we can do that, right? Is to let these things play out in the marketplace, I think. So,
and we have a very good example of that as an example that you have brought up many times, Jackie Robinson. Okay, I mean, the marketplace of ideas, sure, blacks suffer a lot through the Jim Crow era, and and even after to some extent. But look at the progress that was being made before we had all the civil rights law, the voting rights laws, and all that kind of stuff. Jackie Robinson got into the major leagues in 1947. That is almost 20 years.
Leon, before you go on too much longer, let me just set the stage just so people can understand, because a lot of people confuse Jim Crow with being not the government, but essentially the marketplace, right? Like the market created Jim Crow. The market didn't create Jim Crow. That was laws in the South, right?
Yes.
Those were Jim Crow laws. So if you were
I just want to say, Jason, Democratic controlled laws, just to be clear.
Yeah, Democrats love those identity-based laws. Whether it's 1950 or 2025, they love their identity-based laws. but the thing was, though, that if you were a business that, say, wanted to, like, let's say you were a train company or a bus company, or if you were a lunch diner, if you wanted to allow integration, you literally couldn't. There were laws on the books that would penalize you. You would have to pay fines, and you may get shut down if you didn't go along with those laws. So this was not something that was the free market testing these things out. This wasn't like saying freedom of association. Hey, you got a racist diner down the street, non-racist diner down the street. This was literally the government says you all have to be a racist diner, right?
Yes.
Or you all have to be a racist bus service, or you all have to be. There was no ability for competition to undo it. Like we were just talking about Ackman. What pushes back on Ackman if he was doing something crazy, like saying, I'm not going to hire people with green hats, is that other employers can come by and say, hey, that employee looks great with that green hat, I'm going to hire him.
Yeah.
But if there's a law that says you can't, and where that really played out, and Leon, I'll let you get back to your story now, because I cut in because I just want to make sure people understood, because so many people think that was not the government. Jim Crow was the government. So just to make it clear.
Yeah, just like slavery was the government, Democrat government. Jim Crow was the government, Democrat government again. It was all there. But yet, because of the fact that these things were so irrational, people, even under those conditions, were making breakthroughs because of the power of the marketplace. Jackie Robinson was highly skilled. We had this irrational impediment upon him selling his labor units. Okay, the laws in the South and laws in other parts of the country. He could not sell his labor units as freely as he wanted to. But it got to the point in the marketplace where his skills could not be denied. It could not be denied. This is how the marketplace works. And Jackie Robinson bubbled to the top, and boom, he signed the first contract, the first black man to sign a contract with a Major League Baseball team. But this was the power of the marketplace, not the power of the government. As a matter of fact, the government was trying essentially to stop him from being able to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to give you a little bit of a sense, for those of you not familiar with Major League Baseball, because there was, Jim Crow, they called that the Jim Crow South, right? And that meant that those Jim Crow laws didn't exist everywhere in the country. And Major League Baseball was everywhere in the country. Yes. So you had some baseball teams that were in Jim Crow South and some that were not. And so those ones that were not became free to experiment. They became free to say, hey, that guy, why can't we put him on our team? He looks pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And there was a guy named Branch Rickey who was the manager for the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time, and he spotted Jackie Robinson as a talent, and he said, let's sign him. Let's bring him in, and we're going to run this experiment. And before you knew it, everybody saw how good he was, and suddenly other teams wanted to hire black baseball players. Suddenly their irrational bias against black baseball players started to disappear when they started losing games to Jackie Robinson and the Brooklyn Dodgers. Suddenly everybody said, we can't compete with this. We can't compete with our own irrational constraints that we're putting on ourselves, right? And I like this page. This is a page of somebody's put this together, Society for American Baseball Research, and they have put together the numbers since Jackie Robinson entered the league in 1947. And it talks about the demographics of baseball. And so obviously Jackie Robinson's first year, he was like the only guy, and maybe somebody came on midway through or something like that, but there was almost no black guys in baseball. And so you can see it was 98.3% white. And it looks like there might have been maybe one or two black guys that got in there with Jackie Robinson early on, and it looks like maybe a Latino, and that was it, for the other demographics. But there was no law. This is the important thing. There was no law that said you must hire black baseball players, right? In fact, you had laws that actually were saying you couldn't hire black baseball players if you were in the Jim Crow South, right? So, because they wanted to discriminate. And so if you look at the numbers, this is what's really interesting is competition started to happen. So that first year, 0.9%. So you go about 5 years farther in 1952, it's up 3%. And also some Latinos getting in there too. And then, remember, no law saying they had to hire these guys. These are people who the market is responding to, right? And then, you go about another 5 years and suddenly, oh, wow, you're up to almost 9% of the demographics of all those baseball players are black. And guess what? Around 1964, that's when the Voting Rights Act and the other Civil Rights Act laws that we're all very aware of from the federal government came into play, and they got rid of the Jim Crow laws. At that point, the demographic of black players in baseball was already matching roughly how many blacks were in the population. Right? So with no law forcing it.
Percentage rise, yes.
No law forcing it. It just was competition of the marketplace. And you know what else? Every team, even teams in the Jim Crow South, had black baseball players at that point, even though they weren't required to before that point. So, this is the power of markets to punish people who discriminate irrationally. It forces people to throw away irrational ideas, because if your idea is not making money in the marketplace, you got to change or you're gone, right? And that's literally what this is showing. And that's why this is such a powerful story that Leon brought up here. So Leon, I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about it, but
no, I think this is a wonderful story to tell, to show the a truism that the only time the only way and the only time that these irrational biases can remain within our society, whether it's racism, whether it's the Jim Crow South and their insane laws, whatever it is, the only way these things can remain in place and could and allow people to suffer under them is through the power of government. It's the only way.
Yeah.
Because the marketplace will always take care of the irrational biases, but the marketplace can't fight against the government fully. Even though, Jackie Robinson showed that it can make breakthroughs even in the most adverse condition, under the most adverse conditions. But the fact of the matter is, the only way these things can remain in place, these irrational biases can remain in place, is through the power of government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And there's another point to this story as well, because for those laws to come into place, those civil rights laws that came into place in 1964, 1965, they could only happen if the majority of the population agreed with them, right? And And that's the problem, right? What if the majority of the population is biased, has an irrational bias, and they're forcing it on everybody through government? You will never get to that place. And why did people change their mind? Because of heroes like Jackie Robinson, who were showing what they could do out on the baseball field, winning for their teams. And suddenly they became people's heroes out there, right? I mean, just like when you watched your teams today and you got a player on your team and they're winning games for you and they're doing these great things, and especially if they have a wonderful personality too, you know, I mean, look at how many kids wanted to be like Mike, right? Michael
be like Mike, exactly.
And it didn't even matter about the color of somebody's skin, right? I mean, there's so many white kids who said, if I could be like Mike, right?
Okay, Jason, don't try to sing now. Don't try.
If I could be like Harry Belafonte. I don't know. Yeah, but that's the point, right? Is that those laws may not even have happened if it wasn't for the marketplace allowing for guys like Jackie Robinson, and also in the music industry, guys like a Duke Ellington and these other people who everybody wanted to hear their stuff, Satchmo, all these people who were, black talented artists and athletes who everybody wanted to see, and they became heroes. And that's what convinced people to say, hey, the majority tipped the scale and we're going to make laws now. But if you force these things with government, you never get to that point. So or it takes them much longer. And notice that was a very short period of time, 1947 to 1965.
64. Yeah, 64.
Or 64. Yeah. So very, very short period of time relative to how long these terrible ideas usually persist in society through government. So yeah. Anyways, I love that story.
Indeed. It's a very good story, man. It just shows the power of the marketplace. Yeah. That is where we should always have to take our ideas, let our ideas enter the marketplace of ideas, and let's see who let the best person win.
Well, one of the things we've talked a little bit about too, and so I wanted to touch on this real quick before we jump to our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, but is the issue of government, right? And the idea now, this isn't just an issue of people using their freedom of association to fight back against the vile speech of people who are cheering for Charlie Kirk's death over words, right? But now the government is getting involved, and that starts to raise some alarm bells in my mind. So recently, J.D. Vance took to Charlie Kirk's podcast or radio show, and he went in there and he hosted, but he talked about, I guess trying to compile a list of people who were now. So when Bill Ackman says it, he's in the private sector, and so I'm completely fine with that. But when government officials start saying we're compiling lists, that starts to get a little bit scary. And it's not just J.D. Vance. It's also there was a Florida congressman also. I can't remember what his name was, but there's also too that the Pentagon. Pete Hegseth says they're making a list, and so I did want to play a real quick video just to so people can see what we're talking about here.
Meanwhile, Department of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the Pentagon is tracking any comments from military or civilian employees who celebrate or mock the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Now, Hegseth taking to social media saying, quote, "We are tracking all these very closely and will address immediately. Completely unacceptable." News Nation Washington correspondent Libby Dean live in Washington, D.C. for us. Libby, what are you learning this hour?
Now, we did reach out to the Pentagon when we were asking for any updated numbers on who had been fired there, and they referred us directly to this post from Sean Parnell.
So what's disturbing here that we should be a little bit more concerned about is this is government that is essentially monitoring and regulating speech of government employees. Now, maybe there's some jobs that's appropriate for, but this does get a little bit into that area of maybe too much control from the government. Let's hear a little bit more.
And I want us to take a listen to the governor of Utah's thoughts overall on social media's impact here.
This is not good for us. It is not good to consume. Social media is a cancer on our society right now. And I would encourage people to log off, turn off, touch grass, hug a family member, go out and do good in your community.
okay, nothing wrong with just saying to people, recommending to people to go out and get off of social media. It's just when it becomes more than a recommendation that we need to be a little bit concerned. And this is kind of where things seem to be going with the federal government. We hear now Pam Bondi trying to categorize this as hate speech and saying she's going to come after people.
There's free speech and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society.
Do you see more law enforcement going after these groups who are using hate speech and putting cuffs on people so we show them that some action is better than no action?
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech, anything. And that's across the aisle.
So I wanted to, I guess, bring up a redress to Pam Bondi. And by the way, she has backed down since that. That was about a day or two ago that she made that statement.
Yes.
But this is what a lot of people tried to point out to her after she said that is Charlie Kirk would have been the last person to endorse what you're doing. This was a quote from Charlie Kirk, and he said, hate speech does not exist legally in America. There's ugly speech, there's gross speech, there's evil speech, and all of it is protected by the First Amendment. Keep America free. So if we want to honor Charlie Kirk, if we want to stand for liberty, this is something where we do not want to go down the road of hate speech and laws. And quite frankly, that's just something that the left has championed. So the idea that somehow Pam Bondi is out to lunch on this, that she's given the ammunition to the left to be able to control language is just nuts, you know. But anyways, what did you have to think about this, Leon?
You know, this takes us right back to this whole concept of speech codes, which started in the 1980s on the campuses, I was kind of pleased when Trump selected this woman as Attorney General and nominated her, and then she got through the nomination process and became Attorney General. But now I look back upon the way she speaks with passion at this point in time on this whole concept of hate speech. I'm really disappointed. Seriously, I am truly disappointed. What the hell is hate speech anyway? And the worst of all, you know who's drawing their lines on these hate speech? The government is. The government is going to look at your speech and decide whether it's hate speech or not. No. We can't have government authorities doing that. And Charlie is so right on this. God rest his soul again, Charlie. He's so right on that. We, as a civil society, must be able to disagree with our friends and our neighbors and our political opponents. We must be able to disagree civilly, okay? Even if it's the most repugnant speech, we must be able to disagree and protect the right. And listen to what I'm saying here, the right. I don't care about the content of the speech, okay? But we must protect the right of people to speak freely, okay? Now, some of these people, quite frankly, what I'm seeing online, since Charlie was assassinated, I mean, it's some of the most vile things you could imagine, the most repugnant thing you could imagine. I've seen it every day since Charlie been assassinated. But the point is, though, even Charlie in his speech would not have wanted them to be prosecuted in any way for that speech. And I totally agree. This is what the First Amendment is all about. This is what the freedom of association, the peaceably assembling is all about. We must be able to tolerate the most repugnant type of speech. And we must be able to talk and disagree with our political opponents, with our neighbors, with our friends. At the end of the day, we may not agree, but at least we could civilly agree to disagree. But when we have government officials like Pam Bondi and J.D. Vance, two people who I really liked at the beginning of the thing, I ain't lose J.D. ain't lost my confidence yet, but Pam Bondi is well on her way.
Yeah.
I mean, but you cannot have government officials threatening to prosecute people for speech. You cannot have this in a civil society, not one that planned to exist. You can't. And this is horrible.
And this is where we, Because believe me, I mean, I am no friend of the left. I think they are absolutely crazy nuts, right? I mean, they are just
lunatics.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, I'm more afraid of the left than I am the right, but it does scare me every time that, the right manages to get power. Suddenly, they start grabbing some of those same controls that the left was all too happy to grab. And it's, I mean, I think there's more people on the right that understand the problems with this. And there was a lot of people who pushed back immediately on Pam Bondi, and that's why she backed down from that.
Yes.
But, and I don't know that would happen on the left, quite frankly.
No.
So, unless it's somebody on the right who's grabbing for the controls, but you've got guys like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey and other liberty-minded people on the right who are a little more principled, and they raise the alarm bell often when they see stuff like that, and that's why we need those people. So
there's a little irony in here, Jason. There's a little irony in here. It was disclosed just yesterday or the day before yesterday, I think it was just yesterday, that the Biden FBI was surveilling Charlie Kirk's organization. Okay, all right. They were. And why were they surveilling them? Because they didn't like Charlie Kirk's speech. The speech, the things he say on the campuses, the things he say on social media. They didn't like it. So they were
that's kind of like what they were doing to Martin Luther King too, wasn't it?
Exactly. So they didn't like it. And now here we are, the so-called friends of Charlie, like Pam Bondi and J.D. Vance. Well, J.D. Vance and Charlie were quite good friends, actually. The so-called friends of Charlie now want people prosecuted because of their speech, even though they're objecting to what the Biden administration was doing to Turning Point USA when they were surveilling them, and potentially, I guess, down the road trying to prosecute them, I guess, for their own speech. And now we have come full circle, where the friends of Charlie trying to persecute people for their speech.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I think we're just about out of time on the show, but let's get to our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, because I tell you, this comes down to what should be the last line of defense for speech. It should be our comedians. Unfortunately, a lot of our comedians have, I guess, have cashed in on being neutral toward finding the absurdities wherever they can find it. But let's see what's happening right now with some cancellations that are going on in the world of comedy. So let me bring up the visual here.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
And this is what got Jimmy Kimmel into trouble, where the lines start to blur between reporting, political commentary, and satire. And this is kind of where most late night comedy has gone recently. It's oftentimes reporting in a very one-sided way on politics. And as you can see there, when he said that the shooter was MAGA, despite almost all the evidence pointing in the other direction, this is where I guess the lines start to become a little bit blurry.
Between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks. They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction.
So I showed you just a little bit more of the monologue just to show you that, believe it or not, there was actually a little bit of humor in there. But let's go see now what the fallout has been today on that monologue, which occurred, I think it was last Friday, so that was about 5 days ago now.
We have breaking news. ABC has just announced here that they will be preempting the very well-known show Jimmy Kimmel Live indefinitely. That's confirmed by ABC, and it comes at a very tense time with many of the issues we've been covering tonight. There was a backlash on the right because Jimmy Kimmel, after the Charlie Kirk shooting, made the statement that he viewed, quote, new lows with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and with everything they can to score political points from it, end quote.
After years of Kimmel injecting his venom into his late night show for conservatives, I think there's an awful lot of conservatives who are going to find this about the funniest thing they've heard on the Jimmy Kimmel show. That said, there is something we should really take notice of. A lot of times comedians are the ones we rely upon to, I guess, speak truth to power. And clearly they've been doing a pretty poor job of that. This crop is so one-sided. It only seems to go against the right for the most part in current late night. But this does remind me of something that happened back in 2001 regarding 9/11. After that happened, and Bill Maher used to have a show called Politically Incorrect, in which he wound up saying something that I think many libertarians would actually found to be a little bit enlightening. And he was canceled for that.
On Politically Incorrect, the show that once followed this one, he made this infamous comment less than a week after 9/11.
We have been the cowards, lobbing cruise missiles from 2,000 miles away. That's cowardly.
That is a
Staying in the airplane when it hits the building. Say what you want about it, not cowardly.
So what Bill Maher said there really goes to what Ron Paul used to talk about, which was blowback, the idea that they're not just hitting us because they hate us for our freedom, as Rudy Giuliani used to say. There were actual issues of what were we doing in that part of the world. And so that was a little bit of blowback. But it is interesting that Bill Maher has come a long way since then, and that he is actually one of the voices now calling for more calm in our rhetoric. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
And for anybody who didn't read that, that was essentially saying, hey, we got to knock this labeling everybody as Hitler that we don't like off, because this is probably leading to a lot of the violence that we're seeing when we ratchet everything up that high. And you know, to be fair, Bill Maher is probably somebody who was a little bit guilty of that in the past too. So what do you think, Leon? Happy story for you as far as
I have some big disagreements with Bill Maher, and and even that statement he made there and that he got canceled for. I mean, I would vehement. I don't know as a word. I would strongly, vigorously disagree with some of the implications of that statement he made, but I would have to defend his right to say it. Okay, I really would. I would have to defend his right to say it. But he got canceled by a private organization. It was no government involved, so that was
probably
okay.
No government involved.
Probably. Well, okay, you could make that case. You could make that case, but I have. Well, let me put it this way: then I have seen no evidence that government was involved in his cancellation. Well, who the hell knows what was going on behind the scene? I don't know. I can't speak to that. But I would defend his right to say what he said. Honestly, I would. But
yeah.
Well,
and this really gets to the thing with Jimmy Kimmel here too, because and it's possible that there may be a little bit of government behind the scenes. I mean, Trump has definitely shown that he's willing to throw government's weight around on a lot of things, to
true. That's very true.
But this is, I guess, if let's suppose that Jimmy Kimmel was, I mean, obviously we everybody with half a brain, which may not. Maybe too high of a standard for his audience, I guess. But anybody with half a brain understands that Jimmy Kimmel was just lying when he said this is a MAGA, guy, because all the evidence. I mean, there were shell casings with quotations on them, and I mean, Charlie Kirk was there speaking about essentially right-wing issues, right? I mean, this is the whole thing was becoming pretty clear at the time that this was somebody on the left who had done this, and somehow because they'd even understood who the family was at that point, and the whole family had been on TV saying, yeah man, this guy went off to college and he went nuts, he became a lefty. Right? so I mean, there's just all this evidence that this guy was of the left, and here Jimmy Kimmel is trying to just gaslight everybody that he was actually of the right. But the issue is, what should police that? right? Is that something government should police, or should it be the market that polices when somebody is just so horrifyingly terrible out there? Because unless he's libeling somebody, and in this case, the shooter isn't suing him, right?
Yeah, true.
Unless he's libeling somebody, what is the, is there really a legal recourse for that? And I mean, I think the bigger issue is, it really needs to be settled by the market. And maybe at this point, maybe it is just the market, and they're saying, oh my God, we can't have some idiot like that on our station.
Exactly. I mean, I can't. When in terms of Jimmy Kimmel, if a radio station don't feel that this is somebody who should be representing the products that we are trying to sell, I mean, you can't blame them for getting rid of him. You can't do that. But he has a right to say what he wants to say. He did, but here comes the consequences. So, I mean, I'm sure you're gonna find another job somewhere at some point in time. Just like Grant Napier did when he was fired, as I'm concerned, quite unjustly. But they had the right to disassociate themselves from Grant. But.
Well, and for those on the right who feel like, well, we know this is a lie and therefore we should have the government regulating this, I guess flip it back to the whole Galileo thing. And I mean, in this case, Jimmy Kimmel wouldn't be really kind of a round earther. He'd be more of a flat earther. but suppose Jimmy Kimmel was on his show every night talking about how the earth was flat. Is that something that the government should really be regulating, or that the marketplace should be regulating? And I think the answer is clear. Historically, we want the marketplace to regulate it. We don't want some all-knowing entity to come in there and tell them how it's got to be. We want people to just say, hey, this guy's an idiot with bad ideas. Let's just but
the little problem here with the Jimmy Kimmel story is that the FCC chairman didn't get involved with it, even though he didn't do anything. He didn't take any action against ABC or any of the parent companies. But they did talk about the issue of almost threatening, I guess, about the licensing process, which is a little bit of government overreaching into the marketplace. So that is a little bit of a scary part of this story that we cannot deny. But the whole thing is that I don't want government involved in these things as much as I don't. I want the government involved. And But Jimmy Kimmel, who I think is a despicable person, quite frankly, but I don't want him fired because of government action. If ABC or Disney or whoever the hell is involved with this decides to fire him because of what he said, fine, I have no problem. But if it's fired because of government action, I have a real problem. I really do.
Yeah. Well, I think that pretty much covers our show. Leon, did you have any other final thoughts on freedom of association and free speech? Or
life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we'll only get that in a free society where we have freedom of speech and freedom of association, plain and simple.
Sounds like a great way to end off. And and let me remind everybody too, as we leave Constitution Day, if you're here in Sacramento, you go check that out this Sunday. It's going to be from noon to 4 at 8990 Krudoff Way near Hazel Ave and Sunset Avenue, and it's going to be at the VFW Center out there. So go check it out. And yeah, it sounds like a great way to get involved. Yeah, and that's one of those things too. If you want to, before the next show, think about how you can get involved to move the ball for liberty in your community, and getting in with a bunch like this might actually help you a little on that route. So, anyways, until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.